Tansei, welcome to Metis Minute, your source for Metis news in Region 7. Welcome back to Metis Minute. I am your host, Samantha Loney. I hope you have been able to get outside and enjoy this beautiful weather that we've been having. Summer is here, which means people are going to be starting to go on their summer vacations. That means people who live in cottage country and down by the beautiful beaches and provincial parks are going to be seeing a lot more activity from tourists. That's why today we wanted to do a special update and episode for our Wasaga Beach Metis friends. Wasaga Beach is covered by one of the Metis councils in Region 7, Owen Sound. So we wanted to make sure we checked in and let everybody know what's going on at their city council. As I mentioned, summer is here, and with more tourists coming, that means more people are going to be using short-term rentals like Airbnb. This is a big issue for people living in Wasaga Beach. We know these short-term rentals can be an income for some who own vacation property in the city. That's why we're bringing you a recent presentation on these short-term rentals at the City Council meeting.
On to item number 4, presentations. We do have a few presentations today. 4.1 is short-term accommodation compliance software. And I believe we have Samantha White from Granicus with us online to do this presentation. Good afternoon, Samantha.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Samantha White. I'm not sure if I can turn on my video now.
You can, please do.
Perfect.
There we are.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I will share my screen now, and then we can kick off into the presentation. Perfect. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So first, just to introduce myself, as before, my name's Samantha, and I'm the account executive for Granicus Host Compliance. I have been working in short-term rental compliance since 2019, helping different communities to address their short-term rental related challenges. But I've been involved in the short-term rental market since 2013, so a good amount of time to understand the short-term rental market, both from the perspective of a rental owner, somebody who's occupied the properties, and as well in terms of compliance. I will say before I begin that I do know Wasaga Beach very well. I was thinking the first time my son was about 1 year old, and we came out to Wasaga Beach for one of his first holidays. So I do know the area very well. So some of the things that we do know about the short-term rental market is that without having some sort of system in place, less than 10% of owners will voluntarily register, pay all of their taxes, pay all of their fees. The reasons are varied. Sometimes it is just because they don't actually realize that these short-term rental regulations or short-term accommodation regulations exist. And other times it is because it is quite onerous for them. The other thing that we do know about this market is that there is about 20 to 30% year-on-year growth. So we do see a large amount of growth across the marketplace. Again, because it is quite fragmented and it is new, we do see, just because it is very easy to list online, that there is a good uptake in terms of short-term accommodations. So now just looking at Wasaga Beach specifically, so this is analysis we did earlier on in the year, and what we identified is that there's about 759 short-term rental listings, which represents 594 unique rental units. The difference between a unique rental unit and a listing number, the unique rental unit is the actual physical property, so 123 Main Street. Each one of those physical properties has the ability to list on more than one site, and that's the reason why that listings number is higher. So things that we point out with Wasaga Beach particularly is just how colorful the map is. So that really denotes that there are loads of different platforms that are being used to advertise short-term rentals or short-term accommodations in Wasaga Beach. So you can see the red, you can see different components of red, which is Airbnb, purple, which is Expedia, usually that's Vrbo, orange, which is Priceline owned, and green, which is TripAdvisor owned. So what we've done here is we've actually rolled up to where the parent company, so there are a slew of different platforms that are out there. And over time, what's happened is to compete with Airbnb, both Expedia, Priceline, and TripAdvisor have purchased some of the platforms. And so we've actually rolled up to the parent company, so that way this map isn't as colorful as it actually would be. Other analysis is just looking at median nightly rental rate, about 166 US dollars, so about 200 Canadian dollars. I will point out that this analysis was done outside of the peak period for Wasaga Beach, so it was before the summer period. So we would expect this number to tick up now that we are past May 2-4 weekend. Mainly entire homes that are being rented out, and mainly single family homes that are being rented out as well. So in terms of the services that are offered, basically we're looking at address identification, which is the core module, compliance monitoring, and as well our 24/7 hotline and rental activity monitoring. So to give you an overarching view of the service, it is software, and basically what we're doing is learning from a club of local experts. So as the systems continue to change, we continue to iterate and continue to change with it. The big thing here is to make sure that we're staying on top of the short-term rental market. So what we do is we pull down the data from the top 70 plus short-term rental platforms and then match that with your assessor data, so MPAC data. So that includes the physical address, owner's address, and parcel ID. So all of the information is first matched by computer model, and then it's all human verified. So we have a team of 300 analysts, and what they do is go through and find 3 publicly available data sources in order to confirm that each match is correct. So all of the information and full-length screenshots are updated on the platform every week, and we do the data capture at different times of day just to make sure that we actually have a full understanding of what's happening in Wasaga Beach. So what does the system look like? So when you log into the service, you get a map and count of all the short-term rentals in the area. The system itself is totally dynamic. So, if you log in, say today, you'll see something totally different than what you'll see maybe a week from now or a month from now. It is fully dynamic, so you'll be able to see what's compliant within Wasaga Beach, what's non-compliant, what's an unknown compliance status, and what's not yet identified. You can toggle off any of these components, so you can actually just focus in on those that are non-compliant. Down the left-hand side, you can see the total number of short-term rental units. So this, again, is totally dynamic, so it will continue to change as new entrants come into the market. You'll see new short-term rentals or short-term accommodations that have been listed in the last 30 days. We do split out short versus long-term, and this is mapped to your legislation. So short-term, usually we see 28, 29, or 30 days as the distinction between a short-term rental versus those that are over 30 days. And then when we look down at the bottom, we see short-term rental units with street address identified. When we talk about identification, that means we found those 3 publicly available data sources to confirm the match is correct. So again, I always like to really focus on that idea that it is publicly available information. We're not jumping out of bushes or anything like that. It really is information that we can find to confirm that the information is correct, and that is available to anybody through public sources and public data. So when we toggle off all of those compliant properties and we want to focus in on the non-compliant, what we'll see are these little dots on the map. And when you click on the dot, you'll go into the specifics of that short-term rental itself. So we call that a rental unit record, or a deep dive into a specific short-term rental. So we're collecting over 150 data points for each one of the short-term rentals. And again, this will map back to what your regulations or your legislation is. So we can see here active, which means they're active in the short-term rental market. Identified, so they've been identified as a short-term rental. We found those 3 publicly available data sources. And then compliant. So when we look at compliance, we are tracking all of the actual aspects of compliance that are mapped again to your short-term rental regulations. So you can see as well the listing information. So which platforms are they active on? So you can see here Vrbo, Airbnb as two examples. So we are tracking the top 70 plus short-term rental platforms. So really you are going to see the full picture of the short-term rental market. Down at the bottom, you can see the match details. So that's, again, going into those 3 publicly available data sources. And really, it gives you an understanding and analysis of how we actually substantiated each match. So you'll have who the analyst was that substantiated the match, and as well a write-up of how they went about substantiating the match as well. So here you can see, as an example, you can see a pin that's been dropped. You can see the trees that are outside of a property. And then when you see the inside of the property itself, you can see the same vantage point or the same trees. So that's an example of how we actually go about substantiating each match. Other information, you can see the listing details for each one of the properties as well. So some of the things that people tend to focus on are things like occupancy rate to make sure that people are staying within the limits of occupancy rate. So you can see here max number of people per bedroom, and then making sure that it is staying within the regulations. Other information that tends to be very useful, time-length activity, so understanding how active that property was, especially when enacting new regulations. So we can see a documented stay here, and then we can see other documented stays. We can see when a property has been reposted, when it's been removed. So we do have a really good understanding of what's happening with each one of those short-term rentals. The one thing that I will flag is that this information has been tracked and captured back to the inception of host compliance, so back to 2015, back to when that short-term rental became active in the marketplace. So it gives you a really good base of information to understand and confirm that this short-term rental has been active within this marketplace. So that gives you a good overview of the address identification. Again, this is the main and core module, and then from there, that's when we start driving compliance through. So once we've actually identified all of the short-term rentals or short-term accommodations that are active within Wasaga Beach, the next thing is to be able to communicate with short-term rental or short-term accommodation owners. So one, to look at, just informing them that they are required to get registered, to let them know if they're out of compliance with any regulations, or if you enact any other further regulations, to be able to communicate those to prospective owners as well. So the two things that we know that are really important in terms of driving compliance is one, making sure that you have all of the pertinent information that's there on that front page so they know what's expected of them. And then two, to make sure that you actually have a snapshot of the specific listing. So people understand that this is specific to them. This is not a generic email that's sent out or letter that's sent out to everybody. This is specific to their short-term rental. I will note it is actual physical mail that's sent out to the prospective owner or to the respective owner. It isn't an email that's sent. It is physical mail that's sent out. So again, there's no cap on the number of letters that can be sent. The big thing is just making sure that the cadence and tone is correct for Wasaga Beach, and that we have the information that is pertinent to the owner. So we do have a huge base of templates that we can work from. So we do work with the team in order to ensure that the cadence and tone is correct for Wasaga Beach. And again, what happens is we would create what's called a rental unit table, and then the person within Wasaga Beach that needs to send out the letter, basically they just press the button that says send a letter, and we do all of the envelope stuffing, stamp licking for you. So it really just makes sure that there is a systematic approach to drive through to compliance. So we do have letters in terms of a first warning, or to let people know that new regulations have been enacted, to let them know that they need to register, to let them know that they haven't registered, that they're out of compliance. So basically there'd be a full base of templates that are created, and then basically the person just presses the button to say send a letter, and the letters are sent on your behalf, on your letterhead, communicating whatever is expected of the owner. Okay. So we've identified all of the addresses. We've sent out letters to let people know that they are to get registered with Wasaga Beach. The next bit is our permitting and registration. So what we would look to do is work with your current solution for registration and permitting. So we would actually have a tie-in with that solution or system. What would happen is on your current solution, people would get registered. They already know how to use your system. So we're actually just using your current system. And then that information would be pulled into our host compliant short-term rental solution so that it would update that somebody has become compliant with registration. So again, the big thing here is just to streamline systems, make sure that it's as easy as possible to update our system and to show that somebody is compliant with your regulations. So the information would pull in automatically, and then we move on from there. The final bit is our 24/7 hotline. And so basically what we want to do is have a system in place in order to track and capture any complaints that come through for short-term rentals. So what we have is a 4-step process. So when you have a concerned neighbor and they can call through or report online that there was an incident or an issue with a short-term rental. One of the things that we always talk about is having a named emergency contact for each one of those short-term rental units. So the second thing that we'd actually ask for is proof. So whomever the person is that calls in, what they'll ask for is pictures or videos to be uploaded to show whatever the issue is. One thing that we've always had flagged from different municipalities is that you want to make sure that there actually is an issue at that short-term rental. And so that's the reason why we do ask for pictures or videos of what the alleged complaint is. So as a resolution, what we do is we contact that initial complainant, we contact the named emergency person to let them know that there is an issue at their short-term rental. So usually they're tasked with being on site within 1 to 2 hours to deal with whatever the issue is. And then to complete the feedback loop, we'll actually contact the initial complainant to ensure that the issue has been resolved within that time frame. So all of the information is captured and logged within our system. On Monday or Tuesday, whenever enforcement comes in, they can actually see what's happened. All of the calls are recorded. It's all time and date stamped. And so you'll actually have a full picture of what's actually happened. If you have a property that remains non-compliant or that is a problem property, again, now you have information that's logged and captured and linked back to that short-term rental that will give you information about what's happening within that short-term rental. So the one thing that we do say is that within year 2, year 3, year 4 of using the system, then you have a huge amount of data that's available to you to start driving compliance of your regulations or to make any revisions to your bylaw. So just to recap, what we've looked at so far is we've identified all of the addresses. We've sent out letters to let people know that there's a new bylaw or new regulations that are being tracked and being enforced. We've worked with your current permitting and registration service so that people get registered. We've been able to track any sort of incidents that have happened and track and log that back to the short-term rental. So the other two components that are sort of tabled for later on are looking at tax collection as well as rental activity. So these are really linked to MAT tax and MAT tax enactment. Municipal accommodation tax within Ontario has been on the books for a number of years now, but we have found within the last year or two that there has been more of a push to start enforcing MAT tax and MAT tax collection. So for host compliance, what we can look at is one, collecting the tax for you, linking that back to the short-term accommodations themselves and allowing them to collect the tax. And then the other component is to ensure that they have collected the correct amount of tax. So that's our rental activity monitoring. So with our rental activity monitoring, what we're looking at is for a property of this type, how much activity is likely to have been generated. So we look at things like proximity to attractions, so proximity to Wasaga Beach, number of bedrooms in that property. And then basically what we come up with is a report of how much activity is likely to have been generated in this property. So we have a minimum amount, which is tracking back to the cost of that property to the amount of activity that we can see that's happened in that property. So that's the absolute minimum that could have been generated by that property. A medium number or mid number, which is closer to the amount that is likely to have been generated, and a maximum number. So if that property had been active throughout all of the season, how much money is likely to have been generated from that property. So what we want to do is look at the most egregious properties out there that are clearly not paying their full amount of MAT tax and flag it within the system. And then from there, what will happen is it will be flagged in the system. We'd again send out letters on your behalf on your letterhead communicating that there's been an underpayment of tax, and can they either remit the correct amount of tax based on the information that we have, or provide activity logs, which are available on all of the short-term rental platforms to substantiate that the correct amount of tax has been paid. So again, the big thing here is to optimize MAT tax collection and to ensure that the correct amount of tax has been paid through. Okay. So I've gone through everything, but I think just to close, I really wanted to let you guys know that you're in good stead. I have worked across Ontario again for the last 5 years, and there really has been a groundswell in terms of short-term rental compliance and just driving through to short-term rental compliance. I will say that, over the last 2 or so years, across Northern Ontario, we really have started to look at tracking short-term rentals and driving compliance through really effectively. And so we can see that, we have started to achieve the outcomes that are needed across Northern Ontario specifically. So I welcome any questions that you have and hope to welcome you as customers quite soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And I'll look to Carly Murdoch, our Special Projects Leader, to give us some more information. Carly?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I just wanted to provide a little context to the report and then obviously open up the floor to any questions about the software specifically to Samantha, and then anything about the report to myself. But what I really wanted to stress is that this report is really just a recommendation today for a software purchase that's going to help us address some of the major concerns and complaints that we've received from the 2 engagement sessions with the public and with the tourism businesses regarding short-term accommodations, which I'm going to colloquially call STAs from now on just to avoid the lengthy words. And really, it's comments that we've also received through online survey. So overwhelmingly, these comments have been focused not on our current STA licensing regulations, but rather on the town's perceived inability to enforce them. And so residents and business owners both have come to me actually to discuss their frustration with what they see as a lack of repercussions for STA businesses operating outside of our bylaws, and a lack of change in our policy approach to this issue. So as part of these engagement sessions, I did bring forward a discussion of this type of compliance software with the public and how it might change the way in which the town is able to approach STA enforcement, and it was received rather well with the individuals that we did discuss it with. And really the purpose of this software is to provide our staff with the necessary tools to better enforce our existing bylaws surrounding STAs, but also any future bylaws that come into effect. And my hope really is that this software, the new penalty measures that are going to be brought forward at another council meeting, and a new enforcement strategy. With these things, we're not only going to be able to gain compliance from the STA community, but we're also going to be able to repair that trust, the trust with our licensed businesses and residents in the town's commitment to maintaining our community standards and quality of life. And so to situate this report specifically in the overall scheme of the project for STA software, or STA, review, I just think it's important to note that right now this is a discussion of software, but forthcoming at a future council meeting will be an in-depth discussion about the survey results and recommendations from staff at that time for how we might change our regulations. But for now, this is really just asking for software and looking at our current existing regulations. So I look forward to any questions or concerns you may have for myself or for Samantha. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Carly. And we'll now look to Council for questions. Councillor Belanger.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. I will say that Carly and I had a conversation about all of the points I'm going to raise. Some she's sort of addressed at a later date, but I'll mention them because, and the public will be concerned where we're going. So, Carly, I don't know if you want to reply at the end to all of them, or, okay. So the first was just to clarify that the ask is for a running 12 months. It indicated 2024, but it would be for the 24, 25, I believe. One of the things I thought of right away, it indicated the compatibility with some of the town's systems to be utilized in conjunction with this software. So I wanted to make sure that we had checked with our third-party security to make sure that it wasn't creating unprotected backdoor or anything like that, to make sure that our data is completely safe. It went on to, it talked about the 595 STRs and more units, but in season up to 1,000 units during the summer. And I asked how many are in areas of compliance or in areas of non-compliance that are prohibited. And that goes to the current official plan and the new official plan. Like it's been my experience in dealing with residents that we have a lot of situations where we'd have areas north of Moseley where we have a legal STR and the house beside is illegal. So I was hoping that, through our future plans that we have some kind of better view of where we deem STRs can effectively operate or not operate. The report primarily indicates that cost recovery through the AMPS penalties, but if I read the report correctly, it said that in peak season, as many as 90% of current STRs are unregistered, and that generally through the entire year that 70% are not registered. So I'm not sure what the registration and licensing revenue would be to the town, but I would expect that given the investment we're potentially going to make, that might be substantial. Covered that. And then the final thing is just most of us have been through at Roma and AMO previously presentations from another number of other municipalities where, and this is coming into the future, I get, is whether or not we would cap the number of STRs for Wasaga Beach or have a grandfathering and then dwindle down as some had done. And then using the software that we have some kind of demerit or a compliance program where penalties increase or licenses are revoked and that type of thing. But as Carly indicated, I think those discussions for another meeting, but I think just things that the public understands that are being looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Carly?
Thank you, through your worship. So to go in order then, so you are correct. So this would be a 12-month annual subscription. So I think there might be some confusion perhaps in the financial implications section where we talk about consideration for this in the 2025 budget. What we're saying is that, much like any contract that you would begin, let's say we were to begin this now in June, then presumably the expiry would come again up for renewal in June of the following year, but it's something that we would have to consider where we're going to pull that money from through the budgeting process, because right now the recommendation is that we take it currently from parking reserves, but that's not maybe what we're going to be doing in the future, and that'll be dependent really on whether or not we're going to be making enough money through licensing fees or through other means of revenue to support that cost, that yearly cost. in terms of compatibility with our existing software. So we have had discussions with Granicus and with Samantha that this will coincide with CityView, which is what actually led us to this particular company rather than some of the other ones, is because they do have that API integration with CityView. And it's within our IT department's hands right now to be looking and discussing with Granicus once we receive direction from council on their security certificate. They've already sent us a lot of information around that, and I'm not going to claim to be able to give you the full details on how that works, but it is something that is going to be vetted through our third party, through Jocelyn and through the IT department as well, which is also why the recommendation is subject to a technical review as well. So that would be through the treasurer and through the IT department. And then based off of your question about how many of the 1,000 or the existing 594 right now are STRs are in compliant zones, so in areas where we do permit STAs. I don't have an interactive map to be able to look at that, but to just take a cursory glance at the map that Granicus has been able to provide us, I would say that a large number of them, I couldn't tell you proportion, but I would hazard a guess to say anywhere between 35 to 45% are not in areas where we currently permit STAs to operate. I'm guessing that number would increase in the summer. That would be my, the likely assumption. What that does mean for us, though, is that whether that be through penalties or from bringing them into licensing compliance, there is revenue to be generated there. So I think that I estimated that if we were to take only half of the ones that are currently in operation, and we were to say of those half, 50% of them could be licensed, and I gave an estimate of how much money we could generate. That could be anywhere between $42,000 to $97,000 in the summer just from licensing, if they were able to be licensed. I think that's something that we're going to know once, if council does approve the software. It's the kind of data that we need to be able to really understand our market and to make those assumptions. So in terms of cost recovery, I think that I'd just kind of discuss that briefly, but you're absolutely right. Looking forward to, if we are to, in the future, institute an administrative monetary penalty system, that is something that would help us fund this program, but also licensing as well. And then finally, I believe you asked some questions about caps and some of the various regulations that we might impose in the future. All of these things are on the table currently. Staff will be bringing forward that recommendation down the road. There will be discussions about what's going to be happening. I believe you mentioned grandfathering, or as my planning partners like to say, legal non-conforming use. So there will be discussions around that and how that might impact any changes going forward. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Carly. Anything further, Councillor? Good, all right, we'll move on now to Councillor White.
Thank you, Worship, through you. You can tell that Joe and I attended the same Roma session on short-term accommodations back in the last year. Got an extensive amount of notes from that. There was a couple of delegations there, both from Tiny Township and Prince Edward County. Tiny did choose to enforce an 82-day season and a cap at 300 permits. I'm not too sure if we're looking at doing caps or anything like that, but one of the most interesting caps that they were able to provide through their software was a cap of 10 occupants per rental accommodation. So I think that was something that could be interesting to look at, as well as they did implement a demerit point system when it came to that complaints. Also very, very valuable. They did have some local associations, short-term rental associations, reach out to the town and have issue with some of this stuff. I don't know if we've been approached by any formal associations to see if they have issues, but I know that the plan itself did solve a lot of issues around ghost hotels and just fervorous complaints from residents. Prince Edward County uses a different software. They use Hamari. I don't know if that's a competitor or just a different piece of software, and I don't know if it has an API or not for CityView, but they use the bylaws instead of zoning again to establish the rules. They did have some legal non-conforming properties to discuss as well. But more importantly, they were able to establish rules around off-site ownership restrictions, where there was, if the owner was off-site, there was a certain restriction of the number of days per year that they could rent. And of course, the bottom line, they generated $450,000 in revenue, $72,000 in fines. And they were looking at leveraging seasonal water rates and a short-term property tax to help align the costs of doing business with that of commercial short-term accommodation businesses. So Overall, I feel like what you're going to propose is an ongoing process. I don't need you to answer anything. I just, keep this stuff in mind as we look at what we can get as far as features from this piece of software versus any of the other ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. Any comments, Carly, on that?
Through you, Your Worship. No, I mean that those are fantastic examples, and as I mentioned, everything's kind of on the table right now, and we're looking to our municipal comparators, both within Ontario, within Canada, and also across the border for some of their unique solutions. So it's great to have some of those examples, and I will just say that we do actually currently have an occupancy cap for our short-term accommodations, and that brings me back to the value of this software, is that we have a hard time enforcing that, of knowing who's actually abiding by those rules. So I think that, currently we do have a rather robust licensing program that I think we can expand on. The question is, are we able to enforce that, and are we able to regulate it so that it's fair for everybody? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Carly. You will now go into Councillor, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor White.
Thanks. I know that this was a very important, strategic, question from council, is to get a handle on short-term rentals. I know it's been a bit time coming, but I did want to say that looking at the partner you have chosen here and the report that you've generated, it's been well worth the wait. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Councillor Belanger, because I think he covered off a lot of the questions that I had, and thank you to Carly for that. I did want to share an incident of the weekend. I was walking with a friend who lives in one of the subdivisions, and she was telling me about the huge giant party in the short-term accommodation next to her, and the fact that they were setting off fireworks in her yard. And she did make a call to bylaw and didn't get a response. Understandably, with 2 officers working, that's not so easy, but I love the immediacy of this platform. So the text message comes in, the homeowner knows right away. I also want to comment that I think it's surprising and yet not surprising that 95% of our short-term accommodations are single-family homes, and are noted as the entire home. So we are losing a lot of property to rental stock, and certainly in some of our communities, it's not a good fit, as we know. So I'm very interested in anything that can manage the situation for us. A resident said to me, why don't we just adopt something from somewhere else? And I said, I think we're unique. And she said, no, we're not. But when you look at this, we're very unique in the number of complaint calls that come in and how difficult that is to enforce. So thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. I do support this.
Thank you, Councillor Timms. Councillor Ego?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So mine is really just down the road, so I know this is just looking at this software for now, but Councillor White raised a couple of questions. So just mine is strictly on safety, and I don't know if that comes under the town for STRs or not. And because I've seen it in action, that a home will rent out without the landlord there, and there's equipment there that perhaps the people don't know how to use, such as kayaks and supboards, winds on the bay, and you worry that visitors are there and don't have a clue how to use that equipment. Who does that fall back on? So the landlord, the town. So I just like that, so for your future work. Something else to add? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, sorry, did you want to respond to that, Carly? Okay. All right, Councillor DeLeo.
Thank you, through you, the Mayor. This question is for Samantha, and then I'll have a couple of questions for Carly. So Samantha, thank you very much for your presentation. The question I have is, when a complaint comes in from a neighbor, you've indicated that this neighbor needs to take photos to prove. So if all they're complaining about is, they know that they're renting out for weekenders, what proof of a photo do you need? Do you want them to actually go out there and take a photo of the renters?
No, like if it were just that they're renting out a property and it's an unlicensed STR, then they would just send in that information with the address. I suppose the one thing is if there is nothing there, for it to be acted upon, right? Because the big thing is, is there an incident and we have information. Once the information is logged and captured, then it would still be for enforcement, but there's nothing that's immediate unless we were able to contact that short-term rental owner. So again, if it's an unlicensed STR, then you would want to start having some sort of evidence to be able to prove that it is an unlicensed STR. Because one, if we have the information on a short-term rental platform, fine. Sometimes we know that there won't be a huge amount of information, but again, it is really just to substantiate that there is something happening within that property. If there isn't anything, there's nothing we can go on. But again, the big thing here is to make sure that we are substantiating and providing more evidence, so that way you can enforce your bylaw.
That's great. The other question I have, when you're sending out these letters to these homeowners, if you send out the first one, if they don't receive it, would you be sending out a second notice, just saying this is a second notice?
Yeah, so the one thing I actually didn't say is that the system is intuitive. So you can have a first letter, a second letter, and then, a lot of times what will happen is it will be sent back to the team for an AMPS penalty to be issued. So that's generally what will happen. But again, that cadence and tone is down to Wasaga Beach. But a first letter or a second letter can't be sent before a first letter. Everything time and date stamped in the system. But yes, the intention is generally that you would send a second letter after that first letter.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I have a question for Carly.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Carly, thank you. Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. Carly, seeing that us councillors were not involved in the procurement process, I understand that you also looked at the Hamari. So can you just quickly just touch base why we chose one over the other? What was the difference?
Through your worship, absolutely. So we looked at, there's typically in Ontario 2 main competitors for this type of software. Avenue actually owns the other software, Hamari. So we looked and we've met, and actually it wasn't just myself, it was also the Deputy CAO, it was the General Manager of Development Services, as well as our Coordinator for Bylaw. We met with the software companies and we determined that through our procurement process that Granicus was the best choice for us because they had technical the best word is really not requirements, but they had, they offered us the API integration. So that ability to integrate with our current software that we've made a huge investment in, so CityView software. So the other companies did not offer that, so that kind of put them above the pack. So that was ultimately our decision to go with Granicus, in addition to obviously the dynamic dashboard that they provide. And if I might, I just wanted to provide a brief comment on some of your questions for Samantha. And I can appreciate that, you're hearing this software and you're thinking that, Granicus is going to determine how many letters we send out, the order of those letters, what those letters look like. This software is customizable to our enforcement strategy, our current standard operating procedures for how we deal with the enforcement of short-term accommodations. So realistically, who determines when those letters get sent out? That will be up to us and our enforcement staff. So we will have full control of what those letters say when we send them out, and our officers will obviously be fully versed in a new proactive enforcement strategy that will tell them when to send out a warning, when to escalate, when to impose a fine. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Perfect. I have 2 more questions, if you don't mind. I don't know if you can answer this one or not, but can you tell us how much on an average has been collected in terms of dollars by other municipalities you mentioned in this report? Just out of curiosity, would you know?
Through your worship, from these municipalities, I did not look to see how much they have collected in terms of their penalties or licensing. I did attend a session that was hosted by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing when actually some of our neighbors were presenting, and I believe it was between Tiny, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe it was Tiny and London. I don't believe that Collingwood has collected any of these fines yet. As far as they actually haven't got it off the ground yet, their program. But between City of London and Tiny, who have far less complaints than we do, they have already, this was really done in March, they had already generated $72,000 in revenue from their AMPS penalty system linked to the ability of the software to point out to them non-compliant properties. So there are definitely a lot of municipalities that have used this model to generate revenue. I think right now, for us to create an estimate, it really would be a complete guess, and we won't know until we get this off the ground. Thank you.
Okay. Well, one last question, and then we'll be the final. Just out of curiosity, will additional staff be hired, like an IT or bio or admin, to monitor the software? Or will it be only the third party?
Actually, so that's the beauty of this software, is that it actually negates the requirement to hire additional staff. So the purpose of this is to really streamline a lot of the processes that we would currently have to do manually, which is why we're not able to do it proactively. So all the heavy lifting is done by the Granicus software and the team of 300 analysts that are going to be doing that for us. So there should be no change to bylaw staffing as a result of this software or changing policies. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeLeo. Deputy Mayor Snell?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Thank you so much for the presentation, and obviously congratulations. This is a very robust and automated software. I love automation. It just makes smart choice. Disappointing to see the map and how many are in subdivisions. Clearly in subdivisions where these do not belong, so I can only empathize for the residents that are surrounding them. I also see several streams of income to be able to recover this, so not only be able to recover our investment, but also to generate revenue to offset other initiatives. I also liked seeing that you had several tourism-based communities, such as Huntsville and Kawarthas, which kind of fits within our profile and some of our uniqueness, but also too, you serve larger cities like London and Guelph, because we're quickly growing as a community. But one question I had was, how long do you expect the onboarding to be? Do you think that we might be able to get into the meat and potatoes of this for this season? Please and thank you.
Through you, Worship, I've had these discussions with Samantha, and the onboarding, which is kind of why we wanted to bring this now ahead of any of our recommendations for further restrictions, could take anywhere between 3 to 5 months, depending on the availability of Granicus's individual consultants. So there's not a whole lot of heavy lifting for our staff to do in terms of that, and we do have an implementation plan, an idea of a team in place who can ensure that this gets done quickly and that this gets done, as soon as possible ahead of, or at least before the end of the season. I am not sure. I think the earliest that we could probably do this realistically is by the fall. What it does mean, though, is that it does give us the fall, the winter, where clearly in March we still have 595 properties operating. It gives us the opportunity to work out the kinks in our system, to work out our new enforcement strategy, to use this to better inform our approach to the following season with those analytics. So while it may not be necessarily effective for July and for August, there is still relevance to doing this now ahead of any changes that we may want to make come January 2025. Thank you.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Snell.
Thank you. Just quick supplementary. That's fantastic. I'm very happy to hear that, and I'm sure you'll stress with the corporation that as quickly as possible is always better than ever. And always, and as well too, I'm really happy to hear that they'll be doing the heavy lifting, especially for the nominal fee of $1,000 to onboard. Obviously, they make their money, in the monthly fee that they get. But just because I know our senior team is already so working on so many different projects, so I'm happy to hear that's going to go third party. And thank you very much for such a detailed report and fantastic answers to the questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Snell. Anyone else? All right. Excellent report. Samantha, thank you so much. And Carly, as always, an excellent report. Very detailed, very robust. All of my questions have been answered with the exception of one, and that comes down to the AMPs and the penalties that'll be put in place when the time is right and we get this off the ground, which I hope is sooner rather than later. It would have been great to see it for this season, but I agree with Deputy Mayor Snell. It's not like the people in this room are sitting twiddling their thumbs. There's a lot on the go, so we understand completely. But You know, when you look at what these folks are charging or paying per night for some of these short-term rental accommodations, you know, a small fine doesn't make a difference at all to the people who are out there doing this and doing it in an illegal manner or not following the rules. And so one thing I really hope that we're going to look at is that the penalties, when it gets to that point, are sufficient enough that these folks are going to feel it. And also, I really like the idea of the 3 strikes, you're out. So you have a business license, you pay for that business license, 3 strikes, and you're out. You know, one thing we've heard year after year after year in our community from our full-time residents especially is that they don't mind the tourists. What they mind is that they can't sleep at night to go to work the next day because there's 20 people in a house that's, you know, meant to hold 6 or 8, and that's what needs to stop. So I couldn't be happier with the report, couldn't be happier that we're moving this forward, and thank you for your hard work, and hopefully you'll get that back to us as soon as possible. Thank you. So we do have a recommendation that the report titled Short-Term Accommodation Compliance Software to a Special Council meeting of June 4, 2024 be received, and the Council approve the purchase of Granicus host compliance software, and that Council approved the 2024 unbudgeted annual subscription and one-time setup cost of the software to be funded out of the parking reserves, and that Council authorized the General Manager of Development Services and Chief Financial Officer to execute the necessary agreement with Granicus subject to technical review. Any other questions or comments? Could I have a mover and a seconder for this, please? Moved by Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Eagle. All in favor? That motion carries unanimously.
Another issue that was discussed in relation to these short-term rentals was short and long-term solutions for the unhoused in the Wasaga Beach area. We know that this issue isn't just affecting Métis people living in Wasaga Beach. This is an issue that is province-wide. As you might have seen in other Simcoe community media stories, but we wanted to highlight a presentation at the Wasaga Beach City Council that is offering some short and long-term solutions to these issues.
We'll now move on to item number 4.2, long-term solutions for short-term housing. That's a catchy title there, guys and gals. So, and this is going to be presented by our chief, our CAO, and to be followed up, I guess, with the county. Mr. CAO, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and I give full credit to Carly for the catchy title. This is a separate but very related topic to what we were just talking about. Short-term, long-term rentals, and specifically I'm going to be talking about motels, hotels, and some of our cottage courts. This is a growing issue that has a lot of the folks in front of you and the folks in the audience behind us increasingly concerned in Wasaga Beach. And we spent a lot of time over the past few months talking about some of the issues that we are facing. And sorry, I did have a quick presentation. If you could put that up on the screen, please. While they're pulling that up, it's only a couple slides anyway, so I can speak to it if they can't get that up quickly. We have identified what we're going to call hotspots, and I'm going to keep my discussion deliberately high level. There is a lot of detail, a lot of analytics, a lot of numbers that go along with what I'm going to share with you. I'm not going to share it all because, for a very deliberate reason, we don't want to stigmatize any particular address in our community, but we are aware of where the hotspots are. We have a list of, I would call it the top 10, and these are properties that we are visiting regularly. I will share with you that one of these properties alone in the first quarter of this year received in excess of 300 visits from the OPP. When you think about how that taxes the resources of our police officers, of all of us, that's quite shocking. That's multiple visits every day. And it's not just one property. The top 10 that we're talking about all are, I think the numbers would shock a lot of folks. What we are ultimately concerned about is safety. Safety for our community, safety for the residents who are living in these establishments, safety of our bylaw officers, our building inspectors, our fire chief, our police officers, et cetera. A lot of these establishments were never designed to accommodate people year-round. When we think of a lot of the cottage courts that were built in the early 1900s, mid-1900s, they were designed for people to come and stay for a week, maybe 2 weeks. They do not have full kitchens. They have a little kitchenette, maybe a hot plate. Many are not even insulated. They are really questionable whether they should be habitable at all in the wintertime, which leads to portable heaters and extension cords and very questionable safety issues. But I want to stress, number one, we're concerned about the safety of the people who are living in these establishments. Number two, we are concerned about growing incidents of drug use, drug trafficking, and the things that come along with that, such as the increase in weapons and violent crime in Wasaga Beach. Again, I'm not going to share details, but some of what's happening is alarming in our community, and the people who are responding are growing increasingly afraid out of fear for their own safety. That's something that we cannot sit back and just continue to not address. So we're here today to talk about some of the things that we want to do to start to take action. If you could please go to the second slide. So number one of the things that we want to implement immediately is really crack down on where we have short-term rental accommodations. They should really not be renting long-term. So if you're a commercial operation and you were designed and built for short-term rentals, that's what you should be doing. And we want to draw that distinction, and we want to advise landowners that they will no longer be allowed to rent long-term. And that will have impacts, no question. There are some in our community that are vulnerable and are living in these establishments because that's all they can obtain, that's all they can afford. Some, unfortunately, are only allowed to go in there after the tourists are gone in the fall. They live there in the winter, and then May 1st, they're evicted and left to fend for themselves. That's why Mina and our friends from the county are here with us today to help us ensure that no one gets left behind here. But it is important that this step be taken because a lot of the issues, this is one of the root causes. And it's something that this community, quite frankly, has struggled with for decades. So my strong recommendation to council, it's time to fix that issue. Short-term rental should be in delivering short-term rentals. And if you're in the long-term housing business, you should be providing housing that meets the need for long-term folks. And that includes having fire inspections, building inspections, bylaw inspections, et cetera, so that we ensure that these are safe places for people to live. Number two, again, I mentioned we have a list of the top 10 hotspots in our community. What we want to do immediately is reach out to the owners of those establishments and advise them that what we are seeing cannot continue, and that we need them to change how they're operating their businesses. I don't want to draw a broad brush across all of this in our community, but I think it's fair to say that a number, and even the majority on that top 10 list, are owners who don't reside in our community, live in the GTA and picked up a rental property in Wasaga Beach and thought it would be a good source of income. And they're really not overly concerned about the day-to-day impacts that it's having on the people that are living in their establishments and on our community. We need them to get more engaged in their properties. We need them to better manage their properties. So we're going to start with a conversation and advise them of the issues that we see and be very clear about the expectations that we have for them to clean up their businesses. Number 3, we're going to look for them. The first top of the list is ensuring that their properties are safe for whomever is living in them. And that's going to include very detailed inspections by our team. And this is not a casual glance. We're going to go in and make sure that these establishments are safe. And if they're not, we can take steps such as revoking business licenses, putting them on notice, et cetera. So there are things that we can do to demand that the bar gets raised here so that, again, people are safe with where they're living. We also want the aesthetics to improve. It's not okay to let these establishments run down. If it needs a coat of paint, put a coat of paint on them. If you've got garbage bins outside, build an enclosure around the garbage bins. So I think our community deserves to have establishments that are well run and properly maintained, and we're going to be sharing that expectation with the owners of these businesses. I think our suggestion to council and the approach that we will take is very much a zero tolerance approach to this. If an owner is unwilling to clean up their operation, make their operation safe, not only for the residents, but for all of us that are in this room and responding to calls, then we will put them on notice and potentially revoke their business license. Because again, it just cannot continue. And then this leads to the final comment here. We understand that this approach is a tougher approach, a tougher stance than the municipality has taken in the past, and there could be impacts. There could be impacts to some vulnerable residents. So we want to make sure that they're taken care of, and that is a segue into a presentation that Mina will assist with. And please understand, to everyone out in the community that's listening, we are very cognizant of this. We are very sensitive to this issue. And we want to make sure that the proper supports are there so that we can help anyone that is in need of assistance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mina.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Mina, welcome. Great to have you here. For folks that are watching, Mina Fayez-Baguette is a General Manager of Social and Community Services with our friends at the county. And I stress when I say our friends at the county, especially when we get into these types of situations, you know, the county is absolutely an amazing place for us to be able to turn to further assistance. And they do a lot of good every day, as we all know. And so good to have you and your team here, Mina.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, members of council. What I thought we would do to just work off of Andrew's presentation is maybe walk through our role as the county as a system service manager for the town of Wasaga Beach, and then walk through all the different things we offer, provide in our planning, and concurrently doing, and then maybe discuss kind of fallout impact and what preparedness would look like for any type of unintended consequences that may arise as you start to address the short-term and longer-term stays in inappropriate housing models. So maybe on the first slide there, just to give you a little bit of background. So the County of Simcoe is the system service manager for 4 different types of services, and we are empowered or basically have the designated or delegated authority from the province on those 4 service areas. So employment and income support through the Ontario Works Act. The Housing Services Act empowers us to be the social and community service manager for directly operated stock plus affordable housing stock, as well as the homelessness service and prevention work that's also named in that act. And then the Child Care Act kind of gives us the authority to manage all subsidized child care plus licensing for all child care providers and child care spaces in the County of Simcoe. We're one of 47 service managers across Ontario, so and again, we've been designated in these different roles for over 20 to 30 years now. Next slide. So specifically around housing and homelessness is what we're talking about today. Is we have two distinct roles. I'll talk about the housing services service manager role first, and then I'll talk about the homelessness service manager role second. So as a housing service manager for the County of Simcoe and its member municipalities, we're also the service manager for the two separated cities of Barrie and Aurelia. So as a responsibility, we basically deliver social services that I named on the previous slide to the whole population, which expands over about more than 500,000 people in this area. With the service system manager for social housing, there's really two primary pillars of services: the directly housed and services we operate and deliver ourselves, which is our community housing stock. This was downloaded from the provincial system in 2000, through the first real devolution of affordable housing in Ontario. Here we operate directly a little over 1,800 units. We are the landlords, so we manage tenancies. We operate under the Residential Tenancy Act and are subject to keep those units active based on the Housing Services Act, so we manage the service level. On the other side, in the service system management role, what we do is we fund and subsidize and flow funding to another 2,300 or so units of nonprofit or cooperative housing programs. Again, these are the two kind of legacy programs that we inherited through the download. Additionally, as a system service manager, we're legislated to have a 10-year affordable housing and homelessness prevention strategy, and every 5 years we have to renew it or update it and give an annual report, which we actually presented to the Affordable Housing Committee this morning. So you could take a peek at how we did over the last year. In that 10-year strategy, we not only report back on the things we manage and operate, but we also report back on all the different ways we've created new affordable housing. Over the last 10 years, so this plan ends this year, we were able to accomplish well over our target of creating new affordable housing units. The original goal was around 2,600 units over 10 years, and we well exceeded 3,000, and we actually did that a year early. Next slide. The continuum of housing is the responsibility. So this is where you can kind of see both roles: the housing, affordable housing, and role, and then the homelessness role. So you can see here are the different levels of services we provide at the different stages throughout the continuum of housing, beginning with homelessness and engaging people who are living outside or staying within shelters temporarily, trying to prevent people to fall into homelessness by diverting them through different types of programs, and offering daytime services for those who are street involved or shelter involved and still need to receive services to find their way into housing. Transitional housing and social housing, we talked a little bit about that. So there's different types of programming that we provide in different types of housing models. Some are time-limited models, like transitional housing, 128-day, 20-day rapid rehousing program, a 2-year kind of supportive housing or transitional housing program. So there are different models that we offer depending on the person's level of need. The higher acuity often need more time. Lower acuity folks are rapidly kind of going through these programs on a time-limited basis. And then the social through affordable housing kind of continuum in the middle there, those are all the different types of housing. The rent geared to income, which is that original downloaded stock of housing that really derives your rent through the amount of income you make, and there's based on an actual certain specific legislated calculation. Affordable housing, something that's more newer and modern, and it's post-devolution. This is either developing housing based on the average market rent in this area that's set by CMHA, and trying to maintain usually a 60 to 80% of that average market rent. So for example, if their average market rent for a one-bedroom here is let's say $1,000, our affordable housing program would try to keep that rent around $600 to $800, depending on the level and the design and the development. And then there's other types of affordable housing that we introduced through the market. So here, if there's a private market landlord that's offering that market rent or even higher market rent, like $1,200, we can oftentimes apply different types of housing subsidies or allowances that pay down the gap to the point of where that person could afford it. So usually like 4 or 5. Today, we are introducing for our housing allowance threshold to raise that to $500, and for those units that are coming out of our municipal rent, are coming into our municipal rent supplement, that we maintain, the pocket between 80 to 120% AMR. And finally, we offer rental market rent units in our new builds and in our nonprofits. While they're called market rent, they're often based on the average market rents set by CMHC. So those are, again, similarly lower than what we'd see in the actual true market. And then finally, home ownership. We offer different programs to help first-time buyers with their down payment. And this is a loan that is either forgivable through time or paid back through a revolving fund, depends on the different grant programs. Next slide. So part of our homelessness strategy was to create a 10-point plan to try to address homelessness from different aspects. And this was introduced in July of 2023. So we're about closing in on our first year in this plan. And really what it does across the county is it's trying to develop a system of care for those experiencing homelessness and those who are at risk of becoming homeless. So things that we've heard through the system, and we completed a comprehensive consultative review of the shelter and the emergency and the homelessness system. And, they came up with a series, actually 42, I believe, different recommendations, and we categorized those into 6 main themes. And out of those 6 themes, we've came up with these are the 10 areas to accomplish those 6 things. So the first thing is making housing more affordable and for people experiencing homelessness. And this is us introducing a very deep subsidy for those experiencing homelessness. That could be between $600 and $800. So again, if you go back to that example for a 1-bedroom here, instead of even buying it down by our traditional subsidies, that would still keep people experiencing homelessness that have very little to no income. Usually their shelter allowance is probably around $300 towards rent. Here, you can introduce a deep subsidy, so you take that $300 that they receive through Ontario Works or $400 through ODSP and tack onto it another $600 to $800. So that gets you to those market units or the below average market units. Second one, creating new supportive housing programs. So this is trying to create supportive housing in existing stock. So as I shared before, we operate 1,800 units ourselves that have a deep subsidy, the rent geared to income subsidy already attached to it. So once we start realizing that there are people aging in place or struggling with different challenges that require more care on site in order to maintain their housing and not lose their tenancy. So we're trying to convert a few buildings across the county to become supportive housing programs. And these programs would require people to actually sign on to participate in them and receive the on-site care and support in exchange for falling out of their Residential Tenancy Act based lease agreement and going into an occupancy or care agreement to meet kind of the standards of the program. This is a faster way to create affordability and support rather than trying to develop your way into more space. Creating peace of mind for everyone. A lot of people experiencing homelessness have nowhere to store their belongings to come in and access the services we provide, whether it be an emergency shelter or a drop-in space or other spaces. So here it's certainly just making sure that there's storage solutions that they can pack away and store their belongings so they can come inside and engage our system to get support and get onto the road to housing. Improving safety and well-being for all. We introduced a street ambassador safety team that really works in downtown cores throughout the county. And what it does is it does an initial assessment of where are the hot spots or pockets or places where people convene that may be experiencing homelessness, creates kind of a patrol or a by-call request program depending on the level of need and visibility of the homeless in the area, and engages them, tries to build relationships with them, and tries to drive them and refer them to the programs that are being offered during the day or at an emergency shelter, and or connecting them to housing resources. They also do a lot of safety things like pick up inappropriately disposed paraphernalia, clean up areas of encampments, and just constantly kind of rove around and respond with, sometimes with street outreach or with police services when they're engaging someone that's been encamped or is in deep encampment, meaning like in hidden in you know, a hidden area. Increased housing availability through current programs. So we have a lot of programs that were on hiatus through the last iteration of legislation and funding programs that are no longer limited, meaning we've been given further discretion to spend on those programs. So the domiciliary care program is an example of that. Is a very light touch supportive program. Oftentimes deals with discharge from hospital, offers some health care service, and it's a funding per night program that then now can be used long term. That there was a moratorium on those programs, in fact, an instruction to end them, and now that has been lifted, so we're investing in those again. Creating easier ways to help access this is just a coordinated central intake model, having one phone number and one place to access a shelter bed across the county at any time, especially after hours. So we're hoping to have that one stood up towards hopefully before the end of the winter, before the beginning of the winter season. But it does depend on how we can build the infrastructure and find the right agency to be able to do that call response model. Enhancing our community shelter services and standards, this was simply putting more dollars into the shelter system, making sure that the shelter system is adequately resourced and that someone experiencing homelessness, whether they enter a bed in South Simcoe or in one of our separated cities or anywhere across the county, has the same quality of service and care. So to put it in perspective, the average shelter bed in Ontario usually costs a municipality around $25,000 a year. We were funding it prior to receiving increased funding from the province and the federal government around $6,000 a year. So these shelter program and providers were relying on their own resources and raising their own funds to be able to deliver a service, so that service was certainly inconsistent across the portfolio. Now we've been able to enhance their funding and ask them to basically ask them, what exactly do you need to operate adequately? We didn't ask them to increase beds or increase capacity, just do it better by making sure it meets our service standard, which we introduced. Increased eviction prevention services. So this is a big one, and this is the one that I want to flag because this is something I can see would assist people who are facing eviction or loss of housing, may have enough resources to pay rent or pay some sort of amount per month, but often cannot get into a unit because they don't have first and last month, or they owe a lot of debt and utilities and damages and others. So rather than have them enter into a shelter system and start over and start to try to find housing again, we can divert them out of there by either keeping them housed if it's something to do with utility costs or other arrears, or if it's something to do with a landlord kind of just closing their doors and they need to go somewhere else. They can afford to go somewhere else, but they can't afford that first and last, especially for families. We increased the thresholds and who can access this, and this isn't just people experiencing homelessness. This is anyone at risk of becoming homeless. Finally, improving the shelter on the continuing housing. So another thing we want to do is invest in all of the different continuums of housing I'd mentioned in their like short, small capital needs that have been backlogged. Oftentimes the things we don't pay for, like accessibility and things that get put on the back burner, are things we can't afford, the day-to-day maintenance. So here we introduced a $50,000 grant for them to be able to repair. And then new opportunities of funding. Last week we went to County Council and presented a master plan for redevelopment. And we shared back some of the commitments and offers and opportunities, including from the town of Wasaga Beach, which we're grateful for, to create more affordable housing. And this is finding opportunities of either acquisition of existing properties or developing new properties as they arise. So I don't know if we can continue to go through the slide, but I don't want to take too much more time. But this just gives you kind of between the two areas a good understanding. The rest of the presentation goes into a deeper dive and explains the structures that I tried to go through, talks a little bit more about our new supply and stock and what we've done over the last 10 years. But you're welcome to review it, and I know it's been made public, I believe. So, and if there's specific questions on that, we also included how do you access these services either through 211, who are the outreach organizations that serve this community, and what shelters serve this community as well in the presentation. But at this point, I think I'm happy to take questions or throw it back to Andrew.
Great, thank you very much, Mina and Andrew. Very informative. There is a lot there for sure. We could spend quite a bit more time. But I think what we're seeing here is that in the county of Simcoe, homelessness is not necessarily necessary. I think what's needed is a much broader perspective on education, so people know where to reach, and 211 is clearly the number to keep in mind to be letting people know that. So I'll open the floor here to members of council for questions. Councillor DeLeo? Councillor DeLeo, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Andrew, thank you for your presentation. I'm 100% for it. We're in the right direction, absolutely, to clean up Wasaga Beach. It's well overdue. My next question is for Mina. Mina, first off, thank you for your presentation, and you and Simcoe County do incredible work. I have a question, so it may be a little over the top. I may be wrong, but I'm hoping you can correct me because I've been hearing this more and more. Are people on social assistance or social housing, after our tourist season is over, are they sent to Wasaga Beach merely for the fact that we have empty motels? So are they coming from all over? Can you answer that? Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, thank you for the question, Councillor DeLeo. I would say no, and for many different reasons. As the system service manager, we manage access to services in a coordinated and legislated way. So, for example, people who are seeking to enter into one of those 4,000 units we offer through a deep subsidy like community housing, you have to apply and wait on a chronological wait list. There are some priorities that are managed by, like if you're a victim of domestic violence or human trafficking, provincially you can jump to the top of the list. We just introduced one for people experiencing homelessness off our by name list. But that doesn't, if you're not successful in waiting, there is no referral program where we just say, hey, go to town X or Y. What we do is we fund housing resource centers, and those housing resource centers are constantly scouring, looking for housing opportunities, maybe matching up two people together to become roommates to afford a unit, things like that. But there is no empirical data that points towards people moving around. In fact, it's the opposite. When we launched our rapid rehousing program in Barrie last summer and in Aurelia earlier last month, what we did is we actually request referrals from all the shelter providers across the county for the program. One was a youth-based program, one was an adult-based program. We found that most of the time, people from out of the towns, like for example in Aurelia, a lot of people turned down those beds because they were in Aurelia and they were coming from South Simcoe or Wasaga or somewhere else like Barrie. Similarly, the Barrie program is the same thing. A lot of people turned down the referral to enter the program because it's just outside of their home. So we don't find a lot of displacement in our system, meaning the system of our by name list. So we have a name by name list that tracks and monitors and engages about 1,000 people experiencing homelessness across the county. We know their last known address, we know the location they recognize themselves from, and you don't find a lot of migration. Because we developed a system putting services across the county to help disperse kind of the services and make them more readily available. So the short answer is probably no. I think the data points to that as well.
Okay, great. Well, I'm hoping before our next winter hits, all those people that were staying in the motels that most likely will not be open or they are open, you can find them homes because don't want to see them on the road, on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Belanger?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I agree with Councillor DeLeo that this is way overdue. Certainly, I've had the experience to call on many of the doorways of the cottage courts, and it's, I would say it's, in some cases, it's not humane. Most of us wouldn't spend a night there, and people are forced to live there. So, but with that said, clearly we know of many instances where the landlords will likely not have the ability to address the noncompliance. So no doubt this will displace individuals because I'm assuming that there may be closures or redevelopment or certainly sales. And the deficiencies are significant in many of these locations. So, clearly I know there's some consideration and discussion about an additional 99 units at Zoo Park. I mean, clearly that may need to be escalated if possible. We indicated all of the work we're doing in meeting targets, but I think the reality is that the need is far exceeding what we're able to accomplish. Although we're hitting targets, the need for affordable housing and that last point of other opportunities and thinking outside the box, I think is really going to be what we have to look at, because there's these are very, much of what we're doing here is very expensive. There also needs to be, I think, a significant education, because, as we talk to our residents base, I call it the 50-50 mentality, is 50% of the people feel a sense of responsibility to assist in looking at those most vulnerable residents that are certainly less blessed than many of us. But then there's the other group that it's almost, I guess they're disgruntled that their tax dollars are going to individuals that didn't prepare themselves. But I think the education is all the people I meet is often, a divorce or one member of a family have a critical illness, and there's so many stories behind this. Even, two people working full-time on minimum wage often have an inability to live in decent shelter. So we're doing a lot, and I want to point out for those listening, as I've had the opportunity to work with many individuals at the county, including Mina personally, who has followed up on weekends and after hours to assist in helping individuals in distress, and the passion of the individuals I met and their desire to really be of assistance is to be commended. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for your leadership. And we just have to find more creative solutions. And again, Zoo Park would be another good start. Thank you.
Intent, nudge, nudge. Say no more. All right, we'll now go to Councillor Eagle.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Thank you, gentlemen. This has really been informative, educational, interesting. So my first question is really a short one on the short-term rentals. I get that long-term housing means long-term housing and not for the short-term. What about, I believe there are some courts in town that have winterized. Will you be looking at any, is the perimeter that they must stay 12 months of a year, or that if someone has brought their courts up to, say, winterized standards, say it's construction workers in there for the winter time, and then they move on in the summer, like, is it a blanket for all? Is what I'm asking there, or will that all be looked at?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think we will look at each situation as a one-off, meaning we'll look at what their zoning is, what they should be doing on their lands, what they are zoned to do. If they are zoned for short-term rental, they should be doing short-term rental. But we will look at each situation carefully and thoughtfully.
So my next question, thank you, is regarding the Simcoe overview, and it's been terrific. So my one thought is, and yes, I'm going back to locally and trying to, I'm a firm believer in this housing and assistance, shelters, all of it. Is there a stay, how long you can stay in a shelter? Like, is there a time?
Through you, Your Worship, thank you for the question, Councillor Ego. No, so historically, there used to be like paid programming in shelters and things like that. That move kind of like moved away with this new approach of what they call a housing first approach, where it's really just working on engaging the person consistently on their housing outcomes rather than their time in shelter or stay. And I think even if you look at like today's kind of market conditions, it would be really difficult to put a limit on time in shelter because the housing opportunities and the affordability levels are just not what they used to be. Like the Ontario provincial vacancy rate is at its lowest ever. You know, and I remember even just like 10 or 15 years ago, we would be getting scolded in the housing portfolio for having 6 and 7 and 8% vacancy rate. Like vacancy loss was a real issue. Those are gone. Like those days are gone. Like there's really very little movement. So, you know, shelters are the last resort, you know, other than people staying outside, of course. But so for us, it's making sure those shelters are really focused on supporting people through like a case management approach. So all of our shelters have housing first agencies working on site, Ontario caseworkers working on site, trying to work with people to ensure that they have the right income levels and also are focused on housing outcomes.
Thanks for that. And
Mike, your mic, Councillor.
thanks. So the second question is about, I really believe most people in the affordable housing don't wish to be there and they're good tenants. There's families and children and yeah, I believe that. How do you handle, and we all know they're there, the bad apples, say 2 bad apples in a building? Is there any way, like when you sign a lease, if you're going to rent an apartment, you have to say what you'll do, how you're going to behave, upkeep your home, whatever. Are there guidelines or a contract that someone coming in and what wherewithal would you have? For instance, I do know a nurse that goes into, you know, Sioux Park, and she's a well-seasoned nurse. She's seen a lot, and she is frightened for her life and looks over her shoulder. So that's what I'm asking. How can you handle, or is there anything in place for that?
Through you, Your Worship, as a direct operator of community housing, the Residential Tenancy Act and the lease agreements do kind of lay out a whole bunch of obligations for the landlord and for the tenant. Tenant's got to pay their rent on time, keep the unit in good condition, and maintain what we call the quiet enjoyment of the space. Post, I think it was 2011 or 12, it's a non-smoking, like within the no smoking acts that came in Ontario. That probably applies, and only those who are grandfathered in prior to that, you know, would not have to meet the condition of no smoking. So yeah, as long as the people meet the conditions of their tenancy, they can stay there. Similarly with the landlord, we have to maintain the property in a good state of repair and ensure that it provides adequate, safe, and affordable housing. So for both sides, really, if anyone's in violation of that lease agreement, they have to go through the landlord-tenant board. As Councillor Slell knows, and we've been spending a lot of time, I think she can answer this question better than I can now, but basically the landlord-tenant board had a considerable amount of change happen right around the time of the pandemic, where they really restructured it in a way to make it more centralized and not local, which is causing 8 and 9 and 10 month delays for a landlord who has the absolute right to evict someone because they're in violation or breach of their lease, but cannot get that order issued for 6 to 8 or 9 and 10 months now. But that being said, using the Residential Tenancy Act and using your lease agreement can change behavior. There are other things we can do in terms of engaging a person or a household that's in violation of their lease, asking them to remove the guest or bifurcate their lease of of household to make sure that person's precluded from entering the property, or they'd be trespassed, things like that, and or asking them to forego their residential tenancy rights under the Act in terms of their lease and enter into what we call an occupancy agreement, which is those kind of agreements that offer support, which says if you participate in this program at this location for this amount of time, and those can be time limited, we won't evict you, but we'll relocate you or offer you this service on site. You have to participate in it to maintain your tenancy. So there's different tools I've seen across the portfolio, but it ultimately comes down to violation of lease, go down the eviction approach. Now, before we go to eviction, there's a ton of eviction prevention work that we as a standard apply, because this is the last housing of a resort. So traditionally, the landlord-tenant board is reluctant to give an eviction order of someone that's staying in a rent geared to income unit, because it is the most subsidized affordable unit, knowing that if you issue that eviction, you're probably entering the person back into homelessness. So all that being said, there are, like, I would say 95 to 98% of the population living in community housing are in good standing, good tenancies without any concern. But unfortunately, it's that 5 or less percent that could really change the dynamics of a building and the safety of community. What we've tried to do that moving forward, combating that, is mixed income communities. So one thing that you're seeing at these cottage courts and all these different places, whether they're formally part of our system or informally happening, like in cottage courts, is that it's probably the same level of income, all living in the same community, which causes a different dynamic of social health. And what we've tried to do in our new developments is really mix the level of incomes and communities to have a better balanced community. So there's things you can do when you're creating a new community, or things you can do over time by replacing units across that building. So somewhere like, I'll use an example like Zoo Park, instead of having one type of affordability or level of affordability, you might start mixing in, after vacancies arise, different levels of affordability to start changing kind of the culture of that community. So, but there's certainly, as a landlord, we stay true to our lease and we file those orders, and I think the team right here is are experts at it, but it's just a matter of being beholden to the landlord-tenant board, and there's no way around it. You have to be of it, or you lose your ability to be a service manager.
Very much for addressing all of that. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's important to point out that the whole team clearly dyes their hair, or they'd be gray as can be, dealing with the issues that we have to deal with, no doubt. But, this is, before I go to the next question, I think what's important for council to understand and for the public to understand is that the Landlord Tenants Board is broken. It is very, very broken. And it's one of the reasons I believe that we do have a shortage in rental properties today, because landlords are to the point now where the pendulum has swung so far the other way that nobody wants to be in that business. And so you're not seeing people build rental housing anymore. And until the Landlord-Tenant Board gets fixed, and that'll be a responsibility of our province, our teams here at the county level and municipal level, more than happy to help and guide them through that and those changes. But until that changes, we've got a big problem here. And I know that there's a lot of work being done, but it isn't being done fast enough, in my opinion. So, we talk about Zoo Park. We've got, 200, 250 people maybe residing in that building, of which are great folks, with the exception of maybe 4 or 5, but they can certainly make misery for the rest of not just that building, but the community surrounds it. So it's problematic for certain. Great question, Councillor Eagle. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the CAO. I agree that it's time that we took drastic action, and I think that it's been a difficult nut to crack going forward because of the vulnerable and marginalized people that essentially will suffer through it. But I've also been aware when a property was changing hands and to be sold vacant, that people were so fearful that they holed up in there and wouldn't come out at all. So I'm just wondering about the impact to folks that can't handle a change due to mental health or different reasons that they're in that situation. Will there be an opportunity to work with the county or another social assistance agency to help reassure them as they become homed in another place? Because I think that there will be some repercussions from letting people feel, just as Mina said, people won't accept a home in another community because they're losing their home and what they know. And I'm afraid that we're going to see some repercussions of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't disagree. There are some challenges ahead of us, and I can't think of better partners to be teaming up with the county, Mina and his team. So impressed with everything they do. And that's why they're here with us, because we know we're going to need those supports moving forward. And I think, Mina, you're probably better versed at answering that question than I would be. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Through you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think the best experience I've had is here at the county is this undertaking to take this on. We got a call very early in the process of saying, please come to the table. Here's what's happening. Here's the situation. Let's do some analysis together and see who's going to be impacted. So I appreciated that opportunity and our team, not to be caught off guard or have it become a crisis response or an emergency response, because those are quite frankly much more difficult to deal with. So I do foresee, like, our outreach teams or different service agency providers who often already support people in those communities. We probably map out who we know first, based on our clients that may be living in those communities. Thereafter, start to probably organize kind of a needs assessment for a community and see what are the needs. Like, so for example, are there a lot of people aging in place, and would they need certain senior services? Have they been applying to the different seniors programs or aging in place programs that might be available to them? Like, so just mapping it out second, and then thereof having like kind of a plan of strategy of what would happen if, right? So if they are losing that current or temporary housing, what are their alternative options? I do have to caution though, like, the numbers are quite fast, and I don't think, and just to manage expectations, the county will do whatever it can to help and support in a response and manage and coordinate it alongside the town of Wasaga Beach. But there's certainly, if we flipped a switch tomorrow and all 10 hotspots, we're all impacted at the exact same time, there is no system that could absorb the level of response that would be needed. So this would have to be something, again, that we manage, like, and I see here like 6 steps are quite carefully managed and give a lot of time for us to make sure that clients that we're aware of are supported or are tied to supports. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Got me mid-drink there, Councillor. You're done. All right. But now look to Deputy Mayor Snell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mina, and your team for coming. We were just speaking about this morning in Affordable Housing Committee and speaking to the point around the brokenness of the LTB, and Mayor Smith and I chatted afterwards and looking to bring forward a motion, working with you to get support for your staff and your team to be able to deal with these bad apples that sometimes sneak into our systems. And because definitely as taxpayers, they shouldn't be supporting housing for a drug dealer or, some of these folks that choose that method of living. But I think another thing to mention here is the impact to our schools in regards to these accommodations. I know as a trustee, just even having a conversation with Elmvale High School, which is a 7 to 12 school, over 60 students on average a year would just suddenly show up out of nowhere. And when you look at these accommodations, most of these accommodations, the predominance of them are on the east side, and they would feed into Birchview as an elementary school. And so Birchview is highly impacted because when you're dealing with transient folks, there comes other issues, right? Other dynamics that a school may not be prepared for. So this trickles deep into the soil, I think, in the fabric of this community. And to Councillor DeLea's question in regards to, are they being directly funneled by the county? I don't, think that at all. I think it's simply price point. You can get into some of these small cabins for $1,100, $1,200, $1,300, and it's still considered your own space, right? Most bedrooms are renting $8,000, $9,000, $1,000 in a shared space. So I think that's simply what's driving folks to pay attention to what we're doing. The mixed income, absolutely, because that'll also have income or have impact on the schools as well to lessen some of those waves that hit them. And the tenancy agreement is brilliant. I think absolutely 1,000% that needs to be done in order to protect the taxpayer and to protect the units so that they're being provided to great people. And I really thank you for how quickly your team came to the table to have these conversations, and also to the OPP as well in being a part of those conversations and sort of digging through some of these pieces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Snell. So, it's important to point out that when we staff and we started to look at this early on this year, late last year, and the problems, of which many came to us through our partners such as the OPP, our fire department, and other agencies, we quickly realized that there's a real issue here. And I would say that the timing for this couldn't be better because many of these folks, the vast majority of these folks are in the process right now of getting evicted from their winter homes, if you will. In fairness, I think they all knew this going in, and in many cases it's an annual event for many people. They know it, and they camp in the summer or live in a trailer in the summer, and they rent these facilities in the winter. So the timing is good because the eviction's already happening, and many of these folks will, as they do every other year, naturally find housing. What's important to point out is that it just isn't going to be as plentiful to get back into come fall. And we'll have to do some education around this over the next few months so folks can understand that if they're looking for the fall, that those units may not be available, and that there are services at the county that they can reach out to for assistance. And many, I think, also will just move on to other housing opportunities, or maybe even other communities, who knows. But at the end of the day, it's a problem that has been here for many years. I remember His Worship Mayor Cal Patterson and his council from 10 to 14 were trying hard to work on this and to find a solution to this problem. They got partway there and weren't able to carry that out. And other councils after that have looked at this, and it's very problematic. But what I think, again, is important to note is that to be homeless in the county of Simcoe, in many cases, is a choice. There are many folks that we know, I think, Mina, that are living on the street that we can approach, and they just will not come inside. And so folks that are watching, and the citizens of Wasaga Beach, although that's sad, it's a cold, hard reality. And so we're not going to get everyone off the street, that's for certain. But there's also an element of people on the street who do this for a living. There's organized crime around panhandling nowadays. There's a lot of issues and a lot of problems. But what we know for certain in Wasaga Beach is that having these units available, that are not fit for, in many cases, human accommodation, but it's all people have. And I'll never forget coming to a council meeting in 2013, and there was a lady in the audience, and they were talking about a program to, much as we're doing now, to do away with these illegal rentals and rentals that aren't up to standards and safe for people to be renting. And this poor lady was in the audience, and she came up and spoke, and her words were, "Please, don't take away my home. It isn't much, but it's all I have." That's heart-wrenching. But the safety and the health conditions of which some of these people are living in. There's mold, there's you name it. We have a responsibility with our partners to try and fix this. It's not about displacing people. It's about getting people into better quality housing, into better quality homes, and better quality life. And so I am quite happy that staff have taken the bull by the horns here, and we're actually going to move this forward with council's blessing to make this happen. And I couldn't be more happy that our partners from the county are here to help us with that, and we brought them in good and early. It was mentioned earlier about another 99 units on Zoo Park Road. I'm happy to say that I sit on the Simcoe County Housing Corporation, and Deputy Mayor Snell sits on the Affordable Housing Committee, and 99 units are coming our way. However, it takes time. It won't happen overnight. If we could build 99 units overnight, we would, but it's about time and money, and we're working at that, and we'll try and move it along as quickly as we can. But this is a much bigger problem, and we've heard from our partners in the OPP that, you know, with a lot of this comes a lot of crime. You know, we had one unit, 300 visits in the first quarter of this year. You know, the rest of the citizens pay calls per service to the OPP. 300 calls for service is substantial dollars. And those calls, I would hazard to guess and have been told, many cases are the same very few people that are causing those calls and creating havoc and a real poor, deplorable quality of life for the people around them. With that comes drugs, with it comes weapons, with it comes all kinds of things that we have a moral obligation as a council to try and fix and to help people along to a better life. And so thank you so much, Andrew and Mina, for this presentation. I know we're going to go on to another one here in a minute, but it's something that I hope council is clear on and understands, and that we support moving forward to make good things happen in Wasaga Beach. So thank you. All right, we'll now move on to item number 4.2.2, which is the County of Simcoe.
Sorry, Your Worship.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. We just have two motions to receive the presentations. We can blend that into one motion if you'd prefer.
I'll read the first one here. My apologies. So 4.2, the motion on this last discussion is that presentation by the Chief Administrative Officer pertaining to long-term solutions for short-term housing be received for information. Mover and a seconder for this, please. Moved by Councillor Ego, seconded by Deputy Mayor Snell. All in favor? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk. 4.2.2 is the County of Simcoe Homelessness Prevention, Housing and Supports. And again, happy to say that we've got a whole team of people here from the county for this presentation. Wendy Hembruff is the Director of Community Services and Homelessness at the county. Welcome, Wendy. Brad Spywick is our Director of Social Housing. Welcome, Brad. And Diane Toth is our Community Housing Manager. So welcome, Diane. And of course, Mina Fayez Baguette, our General Manager of Social and Community Services. Again, all do a great job. Welcome. Happy to have you. The floor is yours.
Sorry. We'll just receive that presentation at this point. Yes.
Just going to receive it. Even better. We might get out of here by midnight. All right, so we do have a motion that the presentation by the County of Simcoe pertaining to homelessness prevention, housing and supports be received for information. And we heard a good part of that in the last presentation. Any questions or comments on this? See, Councillor Belanger?
Through the mayor, I just thought of one other question as maybe positive. A positive note is, I think there's approximately 5 cottage courts that have now been vacant and not operating for anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And so a lot of this housing stock has already been eliminated over the last few years. We've been able to deal with that, and I think that it probably represents maybe 30% of that area, so it's kind of interesting, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I guess one more thing I will note, and that is the town of Wasaga Beach is going to work with these property owners where we can. If you're zoned for short-term rental, perhaps we give you an option. If you want to stay as a short-term rental, then you need to maintain yourself as a short-term rental. And if you want to become a long-term rental, then we can work with you to rezone, but it's going to be based on some criteria, and that's fixing up these units to make them what they should be for full-time rentals, and move along. So it's not like the owners aren't going to have some choices either and some options, and it's important that the general public understand that. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Belanger. All in favor? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Number 5 is deputations. We have no deputations today. And item number 6 is staff reports. All reports items have been pulled and moved to matters for consideration to be voted on separately. So we'll get to those in matters of consideration, which is our next item, number 7. And the first one is item 7.1 or 6.1, the Poverty Reduction Roundtable. And I'll turn to Chief Williams for this report. Chief?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Members of Council, on May the 17th, staff hosted a Poverty Reduction Roundtable, which addresses term of council priority number 40. Poverty occurs when individuals lack financial resources and essentials to maintain a minimum standard of living. Poverty involves not only low income, but also a lack of access to basic services such as education, healthcare, nutrition, and adequate housing. Poverty can be absolute, where individuals do not have enough to meet basic needs, or relative, where individuals meet some basic needs but still cannot participate fully in society due to their lower income compared to the general population. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to all 57 participants and the 29 local and regional organizations that took part in our roundtable. The roundtable aimed to address the issues of poverty in Wasaga Beach by bringing together key stakeholders. Our objectives was to identify specific challenges related to poverty, share information and resources, foster collaboration, advocate for policy changes, and evaluate the progress of existing efforts. During our roundtable, we focused on 5 critical areas, and they were transportation, food insecurity, affordable housing, employment, and childcare and youth services. Through a structured SWOT analysis, participants shared a total of 652 comments and ideas on these topics. The discussions revealed significant strengths in our community, such as our strong local partnerships and dedicated community organizations. However, we also identified key weaknesses, such as challenges with accessing public transportation, access to food, and housing affordability. Participants expressed a total of 266 opportunities, including leveraging community resources more effectively and advocating for policy changes, and threats such as economic instability and funding limitations were also highlighted. A summary of all of the findings of each of the discussions can be found within the appendix of the staff report. Staff are now recommending the establishment of a working group to review the findings and develop a comprehensive poverty reduction strategy for Wasaga Beach. At minimum, the proposed working group should include representatives from municipal staff, social services, housing, primary health care, as well as food services. A strategy will outline specific actions and budget implications necessary to implement effective poverty reduction strategies for our community. The goal will be to translate the insights from the roundtable into actionable policies and programs that will help make a more tangible difference within our community. The Poverty Reduction Roundtable was a resounding success by demonstrating our community's commitment to addressing poverty collaboratively. Staff hope that by continuing to work together and maintaining an open dialogue, we will create a more equitable Wasaga Beach. Your Worship, this concludes my overview of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chief. Questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Snell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Chief, I just wanted to congratulate you and your committee that was involved in coordinating that. The amount of resources that took the time to come to our community to be a part of the discussions was very impressive, and I really liked the format. It was very focused, allowed us to really spitball very quickly and throw spaghetti on the wall and then move on to something else. And I like the... Pardon?
You threw spaghetti on the wall?
Stop it, Richard. I think you're going to be able to come out with some really great low-hanging fruit that's going to be easily plucked to be able to get started. So I'm very excited, and congratulations to you and the team.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Snell. Councillor Ego.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I don't have quite the colorful vocabulary here, but spaghetti on the wall. But I too wanted to thank our staff, and it's showing here today how committed they are to this subject. So I want to thank them for taking this on, and in particular, our Fire Chief, Craig Williams, and our Director of Planning, Trevor, for being the leads on this day. It was fantastic. It was organized, it kept us on point for the entire session, which was a full morning, and I found the atmosphere was stimulating and just abuzz with conversations. Listening to the speakers on the panel, I felt they were not only knowledgeable of their organizations and services, but I also felt they were committed to our community. I'm a strong believer in collaboration and working as teams, reaching out to resources that are there and finding out how to work together. What does one and how that can work for us here. It's about being organized and pulling the bits and pieces together, and that's what we're talking about so much. I learned on that day that 500 children in this town, no, not on that day, sorry, it was at a Canet's celebration, that 500 children in this town needed toys this Christmas. That's just a figure that has stayed with me. So as we talk about housing and food, that is just a tangible that is there. So grassroots can be wonderful, but sometimes it's time to move on and hitch a small group to the bigger resources that we're hearing about today. So I firmly believe the knowledge and the aid is out there, and let's keep the momentum going, and the first meeting was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the Chief. I was so sorry not to get to the poverty reduction roundtable on May 17th, but I was happy to hear from a variety of people how successful it was. I think it's wonderful establishing a poverty reduction working group to bring a strategy back to council, and I just wonder if there's room for a council rep on that, just leaving that with you. I was aware that some key community stakeholders could not attend, and I suggest that we keep them informed and invite them to communities' future sessions, because I think that there's a lot of stakeholders here that have a role to play and at least need to be part of the conversation. But I applaud the work and a very quick turnaround on the report. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing. We have a lot of work to do in this area. It's clear from this presentation and the one before, and I think we're just on the way to a better Wasaga Beach because of it. Thank you.
We hope today's Métis Minute was able to help our Michif friends living near the Wasaga Beach area. As we mentioned earlier, these issues aren't just unique to Wasaga Beach. So if there are any issues that you would like us to discuss, please contact us at métisandmeprogram@gmail.com, or you could leave a comment below and let us know what you would like us to talk about. Merci for watching, and we'll see you down the river.